20 years ago. 20 years ago, I lost my mind, went crazy, and was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. This was the turning point that changed everything for me. So I graduated college and kind of just went crazy. And I went into the mental hospital, and everything was a blur up until I came back home. Moved back home from college and ended up back in my mom's house. And I was there for 5 years. 5 years after being in my mom's house, after being on my own since I was 18. When I graduated college, I was 22. I lost it, y'all. I lost it right there after I walked across that stage. I got my degree. I was determined that I was going to let nothing stop me, not even a baby. I aborted my child, the only mistake I ever regret in life because I was never granted the opportunity or the chance to have another baby ever again in life. So I aborted my child in my sophomore year in college, and the gloves came off. I just knew that nothing was going to stop me from getting that degree. I walked across that stage, and everything after that was a blur until I woke up in the mental hospital. So I got through it. My mind went blank. I didn't have a thought process. I didn't have no voice inside my head. And I just had to navigate and learn life all over again. I was 20 years old and lost as a pair of socks in the dryer. 5 years of brutal, unimaginable, situations in my mom's house, especially after my little sister moved back home 2 years later. I said I didn't want to put up with that abuse anymore. My mom was taking sides and she wasn't taking my side. So I left my mom's house in the middle of the night in the pouring down rain, and I went to a battered women's shelter, and I was there for 1 week. In the battered women's shelter, it was the unimaginable, unthinkable, stuff going on in that shelter too. 1 week later, I was in my first real apartment in my hometown city on my own, yet again, with no thought process, paranoid than a motherfucker. I had double locks on my door, the bolt lock and everything, and I still put a chair up to the door, thinking I was going to keep intruders out, which I did. It was a company house, and I, had people all around me, in and out, in and out. I had parties, and, slowly but surely, I think that, my mind had started coming back. When I got that apartment 5 years after I went crazy, my mind and my thought process really started coming back. One day I was so down and out. I had a roof over my head, had food on the table, but I didn't have a vehicle. I remember like it was yesterday. This was like 15 years ago because it was 2010. I graduated in 2005 and I moved out on my own again in 2010. I was on that floor that night crying my eyeballs out. It was the wee hours in the morning. And mind you, I had got this apartment in the Hispanic ghetto, like in Mexicanville back then, ghetto. Now the apartment, they done redid the apartment, redone everything, remodeled it. And now black people have pushed the Hispanics out. And now it's the projects, really. I was at the lowest of the lowest of the lowest of my life. I remember sitting there crying. And I've always been a reader and writer. If you've been following my journey, my favorite thing to do is read. I'm still, trying to get that grip and that really tight grip on writing. And I do have published books on Amazon. That's a whole nother story for story time for another day. So sitting on my floor, crying my eyeballs out, I had my pen and paper. I had my pen and paper. I had my motherfucking pen and paper. And the only thing I knew back then was to write and write my thoughts and my ideas and everything down on paper. But guess what? I didn't just write. I started writing Dear God letters. Dear God letters. And I just wrote to God. I wrote my feelings, my thoughts, my emotions, everything to God. 20 years later, I published a book, actually, Briefer Chronicles of Volume 1, my collection of Dear God letters. It's on Amazon. I published a book, and like I said, that's a whole nother story for another day. But I was crying my eyeballs out. And I wrote them Dear God letters every day, every night. And in that moment, it was like one of my first aha moments in my life, epiphany. My aha moments and an epiphany I had. I sat right there and I screamed out as loud as I can. I done figured out the keys to success. I done figured out life. I done figured out how the world works. I remember, y'all. I remember like it was yesterday. I'm talking about 15 years ago. I was still nothing but a baby. So if I graduated in 2022, I was 22 and graduated in 2005. So 5 years later, I was 22. So 27 years old, that's when I figured out the keys to life and how the world works and how the world turns. I was 27 years old when I figured that shit. Be honest, I never looked back. From that date forward, that's one of the turning points of my life. I was just writing them dear God letters, crying my eyeballs out at the lowest of the lowest of the lowest. I was paranoid. I was mind struck. I didn't know nothing about life. I didn't know what I was doing. But in that moment, sitting right there on my little living room floor, I was writing them dear God letters, and I figured out life. I never looked back from there, and I just been me ever since. I didn't figure out my self worth. That's another story time for another day. I didn't figure out my purpose, but in that moment, I just knew. I knew and understood the way the world works, and that's it. That's the story. I knew in that moment that I understood the way life works, the way the world works, the way the universe works, and I just started building and building and building and building from there. And then here I am today. That was in 2010. So what? 15 years later, I am ecstatic. I'm loved. I'm kind. I'm sweet. I know who I am, and I figured out my purpose, my self worth, the love, and I really, 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 really know how life works now, how the universe operates, and what it takes to, make it in life. Love conquers all, is powerful, is rules over money. Yeah, you need money to survive. Yada, 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 yada. Talk that shit. But love and the power that God comes with you, I'm telling you, right there in that moment. And I've had some moments where I didn't have nothing or nobody but God, but I was a baby back then. I was almost 30 years old. I was still a baby, still didn't know nothing about life. But like I said, in that moment, I had figured it out. I was 27 on my own with nothing or nobody around. The kids was, I think the early kids was like 1 and 2 years old, so they was babies. They don't even know nothing right now. And the oldest now was 18. So yeah, that's it. You just gotta figure out the keys to your life, to the keys to this world, the keys to the universe. And yeah, you got this. We all got this, and God got us. Trust in that man, believe in that man, and just know that love conquers all. And that's it. That's all. Love you. Bye.